Welcome, everybody. My name's Andrew Wedman, and I am all the way out west. I'm broadcasting live from the unceded traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, Syilx, and Sinixt peoples. And I'm going to be giving a workshop about alteration, manipulation, deconstruction of the piano, the upright piano specifically. So, I'm going to jump right in here, and the first step, I'm just going to demonstrate how to open the piano. So generally what I'm talking about are older pianos that offer us an opportunity to manipulate them more than we would with newer pianos. So here we are at the piano, and I'm going to encourage everybody, whoever has the opportunity to get inside their piano, to do it. Generally, it's not encouraged, but we're going to explore this a little bit, and hopefully you'll feel more comfortable. So the first stage is opening the top lid, which I have removed completely. But that is just usually a lid with a hinge. You just open it. The front panel opens with little tabs on the inside on either side here, and then it just literally pulls out like that. Sometimes there's a screw or two, but typically it's pretty straightforward. The next part is the fall board, the part that covers the keys. Sometimes there's a tab or a couple screws. Sometimes it lifts straight out. Again, a very basic part to remove and easy to put back. Once those two parts are out, then you have access to the action, the back end of the keys. You can also open the bottom board. You can't really see it on this. I'll explore that more in the Zoom session later. The bottom board has a tab at the top that you lift, and the whole bottom board pulls out. Then you have access to all of the strings underneath, so you can play with your feet or something. So now that we have the piano exposed, I like to have my piano open like this, and I play it like this a lot. You don't have a music desk, of course, but for improvised music, this is excellent. I'll talk a little bit about my process with the bass piano. The bass piano is simply a piano that has been tuned down a full octave from a 440, and this here is a bass piano that is tuned down in such a fashion. And I kind of discovered this and started exploring this as an instrument while I was working at a piano rebuilding shop in Toronto, Paul Hahn and Company, and started noticing how different the strings sounded at different tensions. When you're restringing a piano, there's many stages where the strings are very loose, and then they slowly get more and more tight to bring the pitch up. And through that process, I started recording all of the different sounds that the piano was making, and started realizing that it not only was the pitch changing, but the quality of sound, the timbre was changing. So this is also this process of deconstructing the piano for me is both literal and metaphorical, in that I'm also deconstructing through my research and my process of learning just the history of the Western colonial instrument that the piano is, this instrument that we know today, and kind of understanding how that has been such a large part of colonialism in North America, and how the Industrial Revolution made this instrument an affordable entertainment system for the common household, and how it's become part of our society. And just kind of digging into that has been fruitful and difficult, I would say. I'm still in process, still learning, still grappling with these multi-layered thing that we call the piano. So that's kind of a bit of my process, and as I started deconstructing the piano, I started realizing that essentially what is happening when you decrease the tension on the strings, all of the flaws of the piano start getting exaggerated. As a piano builder or a piano designer is attempting to make the perfect piano, and essentially what I'm doing here is magnifying and utilizing the problem areas of the piano. So what starts happening, there's all sorts of things here. Essentially, what the idea of the piano is that you're going to have a very even and smooth graduating scale, a graduation from low to high, and a graduation from thick, fat, long strings to short, skinny strings, fat hammers to skinny hammers. All of this needs to be very smooth and even, so you don't hear the difference between the sections. And once you loosen the strings, you start to hear all the different sections almost as different instruments, and the bass sounds really rumbly and clunky, and then there's a sharp break between the bass section, and then you get into the mid section, which sounds totally different, more metallic and ringing and resonant in a different way. And then in the top end, you have this very odd ringing quality, which doesn't happen in when the tension is on the strings, because in typical pianos, there's no dampers up here dampening the sound. And when the strings are loose, this starts to ring in a different way. The very top ends and bottom ends start to lose their tone and become more like percussive instruments. All sorts of strange things. One of the main things that happens is that with the tonal quality changing in the bass piano, once you loosen the strings, what you get is inharmonicity. I'm going to talk a little more in detail about what inharmonicity is, but essentially, for now, I'll just say that it is the upper overtones or harmonics of a note are out of tune from the fundamental or the note that you are hearing. Hang on a second. I need to put this into position. My close-up camera inside the action. How's that? Does that look good? All right. Yes, inharmonicity starts making the piano sound more like steel drums or bells. These are instruments that typically have a lot of inharmonicity. There's this kind of more clangorous effect where a single note almost sounds out of tune with itself. Another aspect of the bass piano is that the tuning is really quite unstable, and so the pitch of a note can change when you're playing one note quietly. It has a different pitch when you play it loudly. I don't know if you can hear the incremental change there, where it actually gets sharper as you play louder, because the pressure of the hammer is changing the tension of the string a little bit, therefore raising the pitch, which doesn't happen on a normal piano. Some of the strings will buzz together because they're loose and flapping around. And in general, there's kind of a longer sustain and a lower volume. Anyway, these are all aspects of the bass piano or an altered piano, and doesn't need to be a specific bass piano. It could be, there's lots of things you can do with altered tunings with these pianos. So let's get into talking about harmonics and inharmonicity. I'm sure a lot of people listening understand the basics of harmonics, but just in case, I'm going to kind of start from the ground up. So harmonics are the naturally occurring notes within a note. So if you hear a violin or a piano play one note, you hear a C, for example, what you're hearing is the fundamental, is what we call the fundamental. And then above that are the harmonics or overtones, sometimes called partials, all the same thing. Harmonics, so the overtones above this fundamental are in a very exact series, which is, well, I've done some weird tuning here, so we're going to have to try some different notes. It's going to be an octave above that, and then a fifth, another octave, major third, fifth, and then minor seventh, and then octave, and then major second. And it goes on from there, but those are the ones that we kind of hear. And so every note, all of those notes are existing within one note. And now I'm going to explain timbre. So when I say timbre, we're talking about the tonal quality of an instrument. So why does a flute sound like a flute and a piano sound like a piano when they're playing the same note? It's because of the harmonics. Each instrument has different volumes of those upper partials. So it's kind of like light and color, where there's many different waves essentially that are creating what you see. And so sound is also comprised of many different frequencies, and what we hear is one note. And then a different collection of those frequencies is going to make a flute sound like a flute, and different collection is going to make a piano sound like a piano. So what happens with inharmonicity, what I was mentioning before, is those upper partials start to become out of tune from the fundamental. So if we go up, we start going up, that note for that upper partial, for example, that's way up here, in the case of the bass piano, is going to be considerably sharp compared to an ideal overtone in a normal instrument. And I've done, Matthew, if you have a little slide, I've done some recordings there. I've analyzed the data of these upper partials, upper harmonics, to see how sharp they really are. And it's surprising. Here's one, for example. So this is a string that has been tuned down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 semitones. So it's not a full octave, about halfway down to where a bass piano would be. And this might not make a lot of sense, but the partials or overtones is the column on the left, and then the offset, the middle column, is telling us how many cents it is off, deviating from the ideal partial. So you can see the 14th partial there is 105 cents sharp, and there's 100 cents in a semitone. So it's a whole semitone sharp from an ideal overtone. So it's a completely different note, essentially. And we can dive into that a bit more in the Zoom session and get into the whole math of this in a little bit more. So that's a little overview on harmonics and inharmonicity. And now I'm going to kind of get into more of the nitty gritty of the getting into the inside of the piano here. And so essentially I'm going to be talking about extended techniques, but a little bit more extreme than your basic extended techniques. There's a lot of information on the internet about standard extended techniques in pianos and what you should and should not do. And what I'm doing here is a little beyond that and probably not acceptable in most performance spaces. What I'm doing should be done either on a piano that is a senior citizen piano, 100-year-old piano that is, near the end of its life. And you can give it one last kind of exciting voyage. Or a piano where you have the permission of the owner, or that you're willing to take a bit of a risk, because things can happen. Stuff can break. It's all fixable, but it can happen. So the action, general precautions. When you're getting into the action, there's a lot you can do. You can really kind of get in there with your hands and start manipulating things, but you want to make sure you're not doing any side-to-side motion. That's the main precaution. All of these moving parts are going front to back, up and down. Nothing is moving side to side. So if you start jamming your hands in a side-to-side fashion, then you're going to have broken parts and stuff like that. So as long as you're kind of doing this, you're safe. So I'll get into this a little bit and just demonstrate some of the sounds you can make when you get into the action. And so typically what's happening here, when you hit a note, the hammer strikes the string and bounces back, so that the hammer is touching the string and not letting the string vibrate. But you can force that to happen by hitting under here. You can tell the difference. There's a difference in pitch. If this hammer hits the string, it's this pitch, and then if it blocks, it's considerably higher. And the hammer is actually acting. Yeah, there's a little close up there, so you can see the hammer is stopping on the string and essentially acting as a fret. And changing the pitch of the note a little bit. So that is a kind of an interesting technique there. You can also get in. You can push at the bottom the base of the shank under here to actually like push the hammers towards the strings. Each of these techniques is giving a slightly different sound, which you can explore. And another interesting part is to actually get onto the keys here, right above the actual keys. So you have your standard black and white parts where you're normally playing, and then if you go up above that, the keys do not have. It's an even. Can you see this in the close up? I'm just going to point this down a little bit there. So here we go. Here we have the your keys where you're normally playing. This part is normally covered, but if you get in here and start playing on this part, what you're going to get is essentially a chromaticism that isn't really possible when playing the keys in a traditional fashion. You couldn't actually play a chromatic chord that fast or in that kind of. It's just a very different sound. You can play clusters and chromaticism in a very different way. And to me, you're starting to explore the mechanical aspect of the piano, and it sounds more like a Nan Caro player piano piece where essentially you're playing. What's happening? Whoops, I don't know what's happening. Okay, where you're playing, these Nan Caro pieces, the player piano piece, are playing impossible things because the fingers can't do that. You can't play all the notes at once. So that's an interesting one. And speaking of playing all the notes at once, this hammer rest rail right here, this portion, this is a fun thing to do where you can actually activate the keys and have all the keys strike the hammers at once. Like that. Right now I'm only hearing the top end up here ringing because this part does not have dampers right up here. The dampers end. Does that work? Yeah, there's the dampers. You can see the dampers in there. So the dampers end at a certain point, and all you get is the strings. So what you're hearing is just the high end. If you hit the damper pedal and lift the dampers, and that's a pretty fun sound, which you can activate by hand, or you can actually use the soft pedal on a typical upright piano. The soft pedal actually pushes the hammer rest rail forward a touch, and if you get really aggressive with the soft pedal, you can actually make it strike the strings. You're going to get a lot of clunking and clanking of the pedal mechanism doing that, but very fun, very interesting. Lots of stuff there. And if you're reaching in, let's see if we can get in there a little bit. So I'm going to get into here into the dampers. Is this going to work like this? Yes, yes. So the dampers are behind the hammer here, and they're dampening the string. They're stopping it from vibrating. But you can actually use them. You can use them as little mini hammers almost, by literally picking them up and letting them fall back down. How's this? How's this? Okay, so the combining that with use of the damper pedal, very delicate sound. I like that. That's really nice. Another good thing you can do with these old pianos is that you can actually, what I've been doing so far is obviously random pitches. And for the composers of the world, you can also color code these either with just black and white to match what keys look like, or by simply writing the notes of the keys, which is a common practice in prepared pianos and extended techniques. But you can get right in there and not worry about it if you are using one of these 100-year-old destined for the dump pianos. So that's a good thing to do. Another thing I'm going to demonstrate quickly is if you have this bottom board off underneath, and again, you won't be able to see this, but I will get into this in the Zoom class, is that essentially what I'm doing here is touching the strings with my feet. Bare feet work well, shoes also work, different sounds, experiment with that. You can mute the strings. You can bend the strings, which you can also do with your hands in typical extended technique fashion, but this allows you to actually have two hands, use all the limbs. Why not? You can strum with the feet. That is an example of a lot of the strings buzzing against each other because there's not very much tension on the strings, kind of flapping against each other. For example. So the other thing, if people are adventurous enough, you can purchase a tuning hammer on the internet for the low price of cheap. So if you're in these, this is a cheap example of a cheap tuning hammer, and not the one I use for real piano tuning, but these work just fine for tuning manipulation. So I'll give you, I'll just give you like a little brief synopsis on tuning here, and I would encourage people to try it. It's fun. There's a lot of things available. to do, and this is one of the main things I want to do, is to break the piano free from its constraints of the misconstrued concept of equal temperament, which it is locked into. Most instruments are not. This is the whole thing. This is the machine of the piano and the constraints of the tuning that I am trying to kind of interact with and wrestle with a little bit. So tuning, as you can see, there are 3 strings. We can zoom out. Is this close up working still? Here we go. So we got 3 strings per note. So one hammer hits this in a traditional piano, typical piano, most pianos, 3 strings are tuned to the exact same note, to a unison. So if you want to experiment with tuning, what you want to do is mute 2 of those 3 strings so you can isolate the one string you're listening to. Well, you can, and there's other things you can do as well. I'll get to that later. Down at the very bottom, 1 string, upper bass section, 2 strings, and then from the mid section all the way to the treble, 3 strings. So in the middle, if we're working in the middle here, this note I have with a piece of felt, any piece of felt or thick cloth would work. Tuning mutes are what are typically used with piano tuners. I do find that when using these in a performance situation, they tend to fall out. So not as good as using little bits of felt. So I've jammed them between the strings here, muting 2 of the 3 strings, and then all you have to do is just visually line up the string you want to tune and see which tuning pin it goes to. Put the tuning hammer on, make sure it's on nice and tight. They will kind of work themselves off, so you want to make sure it's on. Get a good grip on there. Safety first, everybody. Go down in pitch and not up. You can break a string if you're raising the pitch on a piano. It can probably go up a few semitones, but in general, you can go down as far as you want and you're not going to break anything. I mean, I'm already down an octave, so I have room to go up. So that alone can be used in a performance. Leave the hammer on the pin, mute those strings, and that's your one note with the whammy bar. Lots can be done with that. The other thing you can do is when you have 3 strings playing one key, playing 3 strings, so you can actually tune all the 3 strings to different notes, and you can essentially have a trichord with any of note. And you could tune the whole piano like this, which I have done. And actually, if Matt, if you want to pull up that sample, I have a little audio clip of a piano tuned to different pitches for each string. So every key is playing either 2 or 3 different notes, except for the bass section, of course. You want to hear that? Is that possible? So, I mean, it sounds just like kind of chords played on a piano, but it does sound a little different because the preciseness of those tritones or trichords being played does to my ear sounds more mechanical than and kind of impossible compared to what a 10-fingered human would play. So that is an interesting thing. So you could, I've done it where they're random. All the pitches are completely random, but you can also choose pitches. And I've tried this as well, where you can do. So one note playing, that is an octave lower than a regular C, 5th, and an octave higher. slightly out of tune since I tuned it. And you can even play with that. It's as you go, you can. So microtonal weirdness makes it a little weird feeling. I like it. I like it. This is kind of this is the process I love to explore here. Also note that a lot of excessive tuning does put a little wear and tear on the pin block. The pin block is the wooden piece right here that the tuning pins are driven into. And so they have a nice tight fit to hold the tension of the string. And if you're doing a lot of this kind of manipulation, you might start to have some loose tuning pins, but it's not the end of the world. So the last little thing I'm going to show here before we wrap up and transfer over to Zoom land is removing more parts, even removing the action parts. So you can remove the keys very easily. Once the fall board, and sometimes there's a key slip, once all of these parts are removed, the keys literally just lift out, just like that, and slide out. And so, I mean, that's kind of interesting visually to see a piano, and they're all numbered, so you know you can. They have little numbers on them, so just in case you, that's what's right here. There are numbers on the keys, and they only fit in the exact spot that they came out of. So if you do take all the keys out for fun, make sure they go back in the right place. So I think one interesting thing you can do with removing the keys is essentially create a chord or a scale to your liking that can be played again in some sort of unconventional way. So if you take out a bunch of keys, then what you have left are the notes of. So you start to just essentially eliminate notes, and you can play freely and only have your chosen chord there. This is kind of kind of allows for a different method of playing that where you couldn't, if you were doing kind of loud clusters or anything like that, it's more difficult to play a specific chord. And this way you could actually do some sort of mechanical thing with it. So there's that is a pretty interesting thing. And the other thing to do is to actually remove the entire action. So if we can get a close up over here, this is very typical. Actions are pretty easy to remove actually, and these little nuts are the things that are holding them in. And there's 4 of those. Well, it depends on the piano, but typically there's 4 of these, and so you simply undo these little nuts here. Sometimes there's these little pedal rods on the end are going to get in the way, so you want to take a precaution there. But once these are off, I'm just going to get this out of the way. These just pull out, and this is a very simple mechanism. Just taking a look at that, you can easily see where the bottom of the pedal mechanism goes, the pedal rod goes in, and where it should go in the top there. And once those nuts are off, you can just grab the hammer rest rail. This is a great place to hang on to the action, pull it forward, just tilt it forward with its bass still in the piano, and then the main thing you want to watch out for are these dampers. If we can get a close up here, these dampers here, you don't want them to connect with these pins here where the bolts were attached. The nuts were attached. So it's fun to, you can even do this. You can tilt the action while you're playing live, you know, so nothing's going to happen when it's out like this. You're only getting clicks and clonks as it goes further in. The dampers. The dampers are not connecting with the strings. You're going to get a weird resonance. You're going to get mechanical clicks and clonks. So that's a fun thing to experiment with. And then if you want to simply remove the whole thing, you just lift it right out and it will sit on these little feet like that. Sometimes they don't have feet like this that you can rest it on. And if that's the case, then you can rest it on its back just like that. You don't want to rest it on its front. You don't want to have it resting on the hammers or the dampers or anything. So that just can set like that. And now you have more access to the strings like you would in a grand piano, doing extended techniques, plucking, and you can just play the harp. So there you have it, the deconstructed piano. And now the fun part, just put it back together, of course. Which is actually not too difficult, just the same way it came out, angled towards you slightly. Its little feet go on to its little knobs there. Super easy, see? No problem at all, right? And in. And so that concludes the this portion of the workshop. We're gonna wrap this up, and whoever's interested in an interactive portion, asking questions, discussing things in more detail, we can get into some super boring math about inharmonicity or whatever you like. Zoom link is somewhere. Matthew will explain that. Where is the Zoom link? Everybody's gonna link to Zoom. Okay. It is in the chat. Okay, so everybody check out the chat. And a huge thank you to Matthew Fava for this tireless work and getting all of this set up and everything. And for Nick Storing and Matthew for inviting me to do this. On to the Zoom.